Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for standing by. My name is Daphne Worrell, Marketing Manager for ODG by MCG, and I'm excited to welcome you to today's webinar, Introducing the New ODG by MCG. During this webinar, all participants will be in a listen-only mode. If you'd like to ask a question, please use the chat feature located in the lower corner of your screen. We'll save some time at the end for your questions. This webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be sent to you within 1 week. And also, we are trying out a new webinar platform today, so I'm hoping all goes smoothly, but please have some patience if we have a couple hiccups. I don't think we will. Our presenter today is Carrie Costilla, who's Senior Account Executive for ODG by MCG. Carrie trains providers, case managers, and claims adjusters in the use of ODG within the work comp, short-term disability, and auto insurance markets. Carrie's worked for 7 years in the delivery of evidence-based guidelines and claims analytics. So Carrie, you can take it from here.
Thanks, Daphne, and welcome everybody. Just going to share my screen. One more disclaimer for today is that I am getting over a cold. So I'm a little stuffy and I've got a little bit of a cough, but hopefully that won't get in the way too much either. So today I'm going to show you the latest ODG platform, ODG by MCG. For those of you who are familiar with the legacy version of ODG, this will look very different. The site that we're looking at right now has been in the works since we were acquired by MCG Health. MCG Health is the worldwide leader in evidence-based care guidelines and claims analytics for the group healthcare market. So ODG was a great fit to be their workers' compensation and disability division. As part of MCG, we're also owned by Hearst Corporation. Many of you have probably heard of Hearst. They are a media conglomerate that has branches in all kinds of consumer media, like newspapers, magazines, television. They also have a branch called Hearst Health, and that's, of course, where we fall, along with MCG. And one important philosophy that Hearst goes by, and that really inspired the creation and launch of ODG by MCG, is that business media should resemble consumer media. So just because it's technical doesn't mean it should look and feel technical. And I think and I hope that you'll get a strong sense of that influence as we go through the site today, and especially if you end up using it and playing around with it, I think that you'll get that sense as well. So a good place to start is just the home page or the home tab. Gives you a kind of general overview of how the site is structured and how the content is categorized. Probably one of the first things you notice is that ODG by MCG has this tab-based format. And the point of this was really to bring the content forward so that the end user can work on one claim at a time, jumping to different aspects of the claim. You know, for example, if I need duration guidelines, treatment guidelines, cost projections.
Carrie, I'm sorry to interrupt.
Sure.
But it appears that your screen is not showing for the audience. It's showing for me. Is there a way to refresh?
Yeah. Apparently there was a button to share the screen and then another button to broadcast to the audience. So hopefully it'll do it now.
Yeah, sorry about that. It was showing on my end, which is why I didn't stop you earlier. But somebody asked, so thank you, everybody. Here we go again.
Thanks, guys. Sorry, but luckily we're still early. You haven't missed anything. So this is the only screen we've seen so far. So I'm still on the same screen. But so we do have this tab-based format, able to jump to different aspects of the claim without going to a whole new web page. So you don't get lost or overwhelmed by the content. You don't feel like you've lost your place because you're still on the same web page, just jumping to different pieces, and you can always jump back to any tab if you want to go back to that information. So that was the point of the tab-based format, which is a change from the legacy ODG, our older site. Also on this home tab, we highlight the three main categories of ODG content. which are disability duration and return to work, evidence-based medical treatment, and then cost modeling. So that might be cost modeling for the purposes of setting reserves, or it might be for benchmarking costs, measuring performance, demonstrating savings. These three categories of content are interrelated. And many of you, in your experience, you probably already know this. I say they're interrelated because really the biggest driver of cost, particularly in a workers' comp claim, is disability or claim duration. So the longer that claim is open, the higher the cost. Of course, one way to reduce duration is by using duration guidelines, and that's a big chunk of the content we have. That's a big part of what ODG does. But arguably, even more importantly, you can shorten duration through the provision of evidence-based medical treatment. So if you get the wrong care, or you just have to wait too long for the right care, that's what ends up driving needless claim duration, and then, of course, in turn, drives up costs. So that's why I say these are all interrelated. Really, any content you find in ODG is going to fall under one of these categories. There's a lot of ways to access ODG content. So you are able to click on any of these larger categories to start exploring the content. You can click on any tab. Probably the most obvious way to access content is the search field at the top of the page. And this is where you can enter any word or phrase. It might be a diagnosis or a procedure. And as you type, search results will appear below. And these are going to be organized by where they appear in ODG. So I've got my lumbar sprain hits under duration. So those are where I want to click if I want duration guidelines. Got some under Tao Index, which is a treatment tool. I'll go over what Tao is a little later. Or if I want cost projections, I would click on one of these. Now you'll notice the default here is that it will search by ODG medical topics. And we did that on purpose because we got a lot of feedback from clients on the legacy site that if they searched, for example, if they searched lumbar, they might get 10, 20, 30 different ICD-10 codes that use the word lumbar, or even lumbar sprain, you get multiple ICD-10 codes because ICD-10s just get so specific. And often people would be paralyzed. If they didn't have the code or know which one to choose, it would make it impossible to pick which one, and then they would be worried that they chose the wrong one and they were getting the wrong projections for the particular case they were looking into. When really any lumbar sprain ICD-10 is going to give you pretty similar projections, and you really don't have to worry about that. Now that being said, if you do have an ICD-10 code and that's what you want to search by, you have this little piece at the top of the page that says codes, and you can just check the box next to whatever type of code you want to search by, and that's when you can type in your ICD-10. And then another way to jump into content from the home page, I'm just refreshing, all the way at the bottom, if you scroll all the way down, we have a list of the most common return to work diagnoses and the most common medical treatments. These are configurable, so if there are a list of 15 diagnoses or 15 treatments that your team sees more commonly than these, we can make this whatever you want to see. And that's something you should keep in mind as we go through the whole site. Pretty much everything is configurable. That was another real advantage to creating this new site, is that we're able to customize and create the perfect site for an individual client or an individual organization. So if you're already using ODG by MCG, reach out to us, the help desk or your account manager, and let us know if there's something that you wish could be tweaked, if you want it to look a certain way. I bet we can do it. So just ask, and we may be able to customize it for you. And then lastly, other than these quick links here, we also have this graphic of the human body on the left. There's these nodes over different body systems. So if you want to jump into pulmonary or neck and upper back, you can use this graphic on the left. I'm just going to click on back sprain because it's the most commonly accessed diagnosis in ODG by far. And the first tab it takes me to is duration, but you can see that check marks are lighting up in other tabs as well. So that's just telling me that content is being delivered in those areas. And you can always jump to a different tab if duration is not what you're looking for. But we'll start with duration. This is the most information-packed tab of all of them, and it takes the longest to go over, so it's a good place to start because there's a lot to go over. And also, we're here anyway, so we might as well jump in. As you can see, the duration guidelines are represented at the top of the tab here on a dynamic timeline. So this is telling me that if today is day 0 and my claimant has a back sprain, the average is out here at day 19. That's also represented by the A value here. Also marked on the timeline at day 10 is our best practice duration, and that's also represented by the B value. So you can kind of think of it like you want to manage from point A to point B. The best practice, many of you are probably familiar with that terminology because we've been using it for years inside ODG. The best practice is our goal. It's the number we want to aim for or manage to. So you can think of it as a goal. You can think of it as an ideal scenario. Really, the best practice is the number that's based on the best practices for physiological recovery times. So it's not going to be swayed by state lines or, you know, things like legal representation or things like that. It's solely based on an ideal case based on physiological recovery times. One more marker is on our timeline here at day 7, and that says return to work prescription. And that's telling me that if I want to achieve my best practice goal of 10 days, then I want to share this content by day 7. There's a few ways to share the content. You'll see that every tab has a print button. So if you like the format of the tab as it is, you can print it or save it as a PDF and email it to someone. Or you can export as a return to work prescription. Many of you might be familiar with the return to work prescription. We had one on the legacy site as well. And this allows you to enter claim level information like your contact info, employer name, email, telephone, employee name, let's call him John Doe, claim number, physician name, date of injury, date of surgery if there was one. Then this comments field allows for you to write a personalized note. So you might want to say, you know, dear Dr. Andrews, can you go over these goals and restrictions for a return to work and let me know if you think this is appropriate in Mr. Doe's case? Or you can just insert recommended ODG text. It's going to be kind of a generic version of that. Scroll down and you have, one second, let me just make sure I'm sharing full screen. Yeah, I don't have any options to make this any bigger, so I hope you guys can see this okay.
Okay. Carrie, sorry to interrupt then. I just want to tell everyone if you want to make it bigger on your end, for audience, there's a little full screen button on the bottom right of the screen share, and you can manually make your own screen show Carrie's entire screenshot since she can't do it from her end. So, Carrie, sorry for interrupting. Go ahead.
That's okay. Oh, I was just testing if that was a button, but it's not. Okay, great. Thanks, Steph. So below the comments field, we've got several options to include on your return to work prescription form. And you can decide, you can use your own judgment what you want included based on the case, who you're sharing this with, etc. So for one thing, you've got your A and B values. So do you want to include the average? Do you want to include the 10-day best practice? Up to you. To get even more specific, we have scenarios down here. And these get into the severity of the injury and the type of work that John Doe is returning to, and give you specified goals based on those details. So this 10-day goal is just general, but if we can get into the severity of the injury, returning to, modified duty, that's going to change where we can set our goals. So for example, let's say John Doe has a severe lumbar sprain. That kind of makes me want to focus in on these three in the middle that say severe. And then let's say he typically does heavy manual work. Well, we definitely want to include the scenario that includes returning to heavy manual work with a severe sprain. And that says 35 days. So now my new goal is going to be 35 days if we're returning to full duty. But let's say there's a possibility for return to modified duty, or we want to encourage the release to modified duty. Let's include clerical or modified work and manual work as well, so we can make those step-by-step pathways to setting goals. So this translates to a severe case of lumbar sprain is ready for a clerical position right away in 0 to 3 days. So now that I've included all the scenarios that apply, and by the way, sometimes these scenarios might get into, whether or not there was a surgery. It's just going to depend on the diagnosis. If there's a diagnosis where surgery is common, or maybe injections are common, or that kind of thing, it'll say, here's the scenario for conservative treatment, here's the scenario for surgery, etc. Once I choose the scenarios that I want, if you want to make any changes or additions, that's what you can use this field down here for. You can even insert the scenarios to make direct edits. Maybe you want to be a little more conservative and make that 3 days instead of 0 to 3 days. You have the freedom to do that using your own expertise. These are really these are guidelines. They're not rules. They're made to be used as a jumping off point while using your own expertise. And then below that, we have our activity modifications. And these are really important because if you're going to encourage a release to modified duty, you have to define what modified duty is, of course. And these will always be condition specific. So, of course, you're going to have different modifications for carpal tunnel syndrome than you would for rotator cuff tear, than you would for, in this case, lumbar sprain. Include the ones that apply. In this case, we want modified and regular. Again, you have the ability to add any notes or insert to adjust modifications directly. All the way at the bottom is the job description field. Now, if, in some cases, maybe an employer already has a job description and a case manager can just copy and paste it into this field, that's great. You have the ability to do that. Otherwise, we also have a tool that will populate a job description for you, and we haven't done that yet, so for now we're just leaving this blank, and I'll show you that in a minute. But for now, let's see, once we create this printable document, this is what our return to work prescription form looks like. Got our general contact information, excuse me, our comments field, our return to work scenarios, our activity modifications, and then down at the bottom we have a signature field. So for example, maybe a case manager is sharing this with a treating doctor, and the treating doctor can go over this, make any notes, and then sign off and say, yes, this looks appropriate. I think that these goals are reasonable, and I think these restrictions, make sense for John Doe's particular case. I've also seen people use the return to work prescription to communicate with an injured worker so that they understand their goals and their limitations with this diagnosis. You can also use it to communicate with an employer or supervisor. It just helps to put everyone on the same page when you're talking about return to work restrictions and our goals for getting back to certain levels of duty. Now you'll notice this is just one page. It did include a second page because I forgot to mention there's a checkbox where you can check to see enclosed job function evaluation form, and it's optional to include that. I had it checked, so it did include the second page job function evaluation form. And this can be filled out inside your browser, so maybe a case manager wants to fill this out just to get more into sort of the nitty-gritty of the activity restrictions of any shift. Or you can send a blank one to a doctor to fill it out on their own. This is only if you don't think these activity modifications have gotten specific enough and you really want to get down to the details of it. So again, that's optional. But the point of the return to work prescription in general is just to be a communication tool to put everyone on the same page and empower every stakeholder in a claim to have a good understanding of return to work, duration, and restrictions. And you've got your ODG by MCG logo at the top left. We can add your logo at the top right if you want. But this is just so everyone knows where this came from. It's evidence-based. It's not just, somebody's opinion. It's not just pulled out of a hat. This came from ODG, which, has made a name for itself at this point to be based in outcomes data and medical evidence. So that sums up the return to work prescription. Back to our duration tab. Everything we've gone over so far has just been at the diagnosis level. So these guidelines, these projections for disability duration are only based on back sprain. And this is just at the diagnosis level, as is our risk assessment score, which is still at the moderate risk level. But we can actually manage to the claim level by adding new information. So you'll notice there's a button that says Refine next to your search field. And this opens up a lot more possibilities for new information, claim level information to add here. The first field says job title or DOL job class. Now, for many years, we've been able to add DOL job class, sedentary, light, medium, etc. But now we actually have the ability to enter a job title. So from a database of about 32,000 jobs, we are able to enter any job title, and it will populate new projections for us based on that job and its physical demands. So I entered firefighter, which is a good example to use because it's so physically demanding that it does tend to change projections for us. So now we've got a back sprain with a firefighter, and it has highlighted the best practice scenarios that apply to a firefighter's job duties. It also moved our goal up to 21 days. In addition, it populated a job description for us, and this is the job description that will now be shown inside the return to work prescription, just to show you what that looks like. Now when I export as a return to work prescription, I've got my firefighter job description populated for me, and you can edit this. If there's anything that doesn't apply to this particular firefighter's job description, you can just delete it, add any notes, or remove anything that doesn't apply. And you'll also see that our risk assessment score jumped up into the cautionary risk level category. And a little more on this risk assessment score. This is showing us the big picture. So relative to other claims, how high is the risk here? As it starts to climb, it's flagging us that this claim is likely to become an outlier, and we need to prioritize from the start. So by seeing a high or extreme risk level flag from the beginning, you know, okay, the risk is high here. We need to put our best people on this. We need to manage as closely as possible from point A to point B and bring that risk level down, bring that disability duration down, and avoid it becoming an outlier. At this point, we're still in the cautionary risk level, but adding new information could change that. So for example, our claimant age, maybe John Doe is 55. Okay, we've climbed a bit in our average and best practice. We can also choose from this list of confounding factors and add any that are present on this claim. So for example, maybe depression or PTSD. We've climbed even further on the average. Our risk assessment score is now in the high risk level category. And all these confounding factors, these are the 9 confounding factors that A, seem to be the most common, and B, tend to drive up disability duration the most. But there's several ways to add other confounding factors or other diagnoses. Of course, it's rare that there's only one. So, for example, maybe there was a back surgery. Just type anything in your search field, and you'll see the best matches appear. Click on the one that's the best fit. In this case, it would be a lumbar discectomy. And, of course, that drastically changed my return to work projections. We're now in the extreme risk level category. Even our goal is all the way up to 150 days. So the model is telling me that my goal is 150 days now, but I'm actually able to override the model based on those best practice scenarios. So even if I've got a discectomy, if I can return this claimant to clerical or modified work, I can bring that goal down to 28 days and override the model telling me 150 days. I just want to mention, I showed you the job title populating that job description for us. If you ever need more information on that job description, first of all, you can put your cursor over the piece that will have the job title over here, and it'll tell you that job description without having to go into the return to work prescription. But we also have a whole tab at the end that's dedicated to the job profile. So if you ever want to click on that, get more information on the job itself, the physical demands, you'll notice we assign a job demand score. So this one is 99, which means that this job is more demanding than 99% of the jobs in the database. It also gives me the full description here of the job. I get a breakdown, front and back body view of which body areas are having the most demand placed on them. Scroll down and you can see a breakdown of the physical demands by percentage. So how often in a shift are they lifting, standing, balancing, kneeling, etc. And all of this is shareable. So at the top, you can click Share Job Profile Now and enter your info, the claim number, and then you'll enter the employer's information and a personal note and hit Share, and that will send the job demand and job description information to the employer, who can then review and approve and make informed decisions on whether or not they can accommodate modified duty. And all of this that we've just seen is included in an ODG by MCG subscription at no additional cost. In some instances, an employer may find that the provided job description requires some customization. For cases like these, there's an upgraded platform of the ODG job profiler called JobX, which includes a lot of added features. I'm not going to get into it today, but feel free to follow up with us if you would like a demo of the upgraded JobX platform. For now, I'm going to go back to duration just because there's a couple other things I want to go over in that tab before we move on. So you've probably noticed there's a little watch video link here. We've added videos on the diagnoses themselves, and it's videos in non-technical, non-medical terms, really designed for the consumer, and it's made to be shared mainly with injured workers. So anyone who doesn't have a medical background can get a quick idea of what the diagnosis entails. And this is great for, if an injured worker is sitting in your office and you just want to show them a brief overview so that they can be empowered to have knowledge about their own diagnosis.
The bones that make up the spinal column are called vertebrae. They are also named for their location.
To get the general idea, I never know if the sound works too well on webinars, so I won't play the whole thing, but they're usually about 30 to 60 seconds, and it's not going to be in technical terms. Sort of in the same vein is where we interface with Medline Plus and Physiopedia, and you can get consumer-facing information on the diagnosis, procedures, medications. You'll see links into Medline Plus and Physiopedia throughout the site. This is all public information. So the nice thing is you can just copy this link and paste it into a patient portal or email it to the injured worker so they can explore this information. And it helps you control the narrative. I know many of us that don't have medical backgrounds will have a tendency to Google our diagnoses or our surgeries and get potentially bad information from, not so reputable sources. And that can pose a big challenge. But this allows the injured worker or claimant to be empowered with the correct information to understand their own treatment plan and be sure that they're getting the right information from a good source. There's links throughout so you can explore the content. And if you don't want to send a link, you can just print out a page as well. So just scrolling down, you can see we've gone over our best practice scenarios. Below that, we have the ICD codes related to the topic in case you need them. Here are our activity modifications, which you saw in the return to work prescription. And then all the way at the bottom, we have our physical therapy and chiropractic guidelines. And these are just there as a quick reference. All of this gets much more detailed inside the actual treatment guidelines, but we've found that a lot of our users who are looking at duration guidelines want that quick reference to the PT and chiro number of visits. So we have that included there just so you can pop over and look at it. And I think that sums up the duration tab. Excuse me. I do want to mention, in addition to the print button, in every tab you will notice a copy URL button. And that just gives you a direct link to include all of the information that we've plugged in here. So you'll notice at the top of the screen in your browser, it's just going to take you to an empty duration tab. But this copy URL link will allow you to come back and see exactly what you're seeing with back sprain, discectomy, age, confounding factors, everything you've plugged in, it's going to show you exactly what you're seeing here. So you might want to copy this link and save it for later if you're going to need to come back and make any changes. Or you could use this to share information with a coworker that also has ODG access. You could send them this link so then they can open it and see exactly what you're seeing. Just saves you from having to re-enter everything manually. Okay, so next I want to talk about treatment, and I'm going to do that by clicking on the home page, which just restarts and refreshes. The home tab is a good place to go to if you want to start from scratch with a whole new claim. If you ever do that accidentally, though, you can just go back on your browser and it remembers what you had plugged in before. Okay. So there's several ways to get into the treatment guidelines. Probably most direct would be to just click on a medical treatment. Discectomy is our most common. And it's going to take me to the treatment tab where it shows me all of the treatment topics that mention discectomy. I can kind of get a general overview, put my cursor over each topic so you get the full recommendation statement. On the left, you can see a little icon that represents the recommendation status. So CR is conditionally recommended, NR is not recommended, US is under study, O is other. It's usually just a cross-reference to a different topic. And then the one icon we're not seeing, the one recommendation status we're not seeing is a green R, which is recommended. But of course, for a discectomy, you're probably not going to see a blanket recommended since it's a high-risk procedure. Once you sort of figure out which one is the one you're looking for, you can click on any topic. Takes you to the full treatment guidelines for that topic, systematized in such a way that tells you the body system, the treatment type, in this case, surgery, course, other treatment types might be medications or imaging, physical medicine, etc. You get your recommendation status, recommendation statement. In this case, it's pretty short because it's just referring you to your criteria or indications, but sometimes you might get a little bit longer recommendation statement that kind of explains itself further if there are not already criteria. Below that are the criteria, the ODG criteria. They're always highlighted in blue, so they're easy to spot. And this is going to be basically indications to optimize success. So it might be patient selection criteria or number of visits, depending on what the procedure is. Below the criteria, you'll have risk versus benefit information. This is not present in all entries. It's not always necessary, but especially in cases like surgery, anything that might be risky or invasive, we'll have a risk versus benefit section. It's always going to be highlighted in this peach color. And then below that is the evidence summary. And the evidence summary is super dense. It's a lot of text. It's kind of exhausting to look at, but the good news is you never will have to touch this, most likely. We basically have to include it because we can't call ourselves evidence-based medicine if we don't show you the evidence where we got these recommendations and criteria. But in most cases, you're not actually going to have to touch any of this. If you ever do need it for whatever reason, it's nice to know that each of these studies is a link where you can get the full reference to the study, the PMID number. If I click on that, I can get the full abstract of the study on the National Library of Medicine's PubMed database. And oftentimes that includes a free full text of the study too, or you might have to pay like $2.99 to get the full text of the study. But in any case, you do always get the full abstract of the study, which just kind of shows you where we've gotten this, what the information is that we've based these recommendations and criteria on. But again, you'll probably never need it. Just there is a just-in-case kind of thing, and so that you know you can trust the ODG recommendations and criteria. Really, at this point, though, when people hear the name ODG, they know that it's based in evidence. So if you say, this is the ODG recommendation, you're probably not going to have anyone say, well, I want to see the studies, because they'll say, oh, okay, well, if it's ODG, then there's probably studies behind it. Another way to get into the treatment guidelines, which is pretty cool, if I refresh and restart from my home tab and just go to the treatment tab without entering a keyword, I can filter through the treatment guidelines by recommendation, category, and body system. So for example, maybe I am a treating doctor and I only want to see generally recommended procedures that have to do with physical medicine for a low back disorder. I now have the list of 27 topics that fall under those filters. I can go through each of them, read the recommendation statements by putting my cursor over, and then click on the one that is the best fit. In this case, maybe we need physical therapy criteria for low back. And you'll see the criteria for physical therapy are broken down by diagnosis and then further broken down in some cases by type of treatment. So, for example, for intervertebral disc disorders without myelopathy, we can see we've got treatment, post-injection treatment, post-surgical treatment, amount of visits over how many weeks are going to be appropriate. So that's kind of what I mean by they get into more detail inside the treatment guidelines than you'll see under the duration tab. And at this point, I can keep plugging in as many procedures as I need treatment guidelines for. So I can leave physical therapy plugged in there. I can add in discectomy again. And then maybe I also want chiropractic manipulation guidelines for low back. I can continue to click on as many procedures as I need. It's going to keep pinning them in a list for me. It's also gathering them all in one place. So here's my manipulation guidelines for low back. Scroll down and I've got my discectomy guidelines. And down here I've got my physical therapy guidelines. So you can just keep gathering as many as, maybe it's all the procedures that are being considered or all the procedures that have been ordered. Whatever you want to use this for, pin as many procedures as you need and then just print or save as a PDF to be emailed. And it just gathers them all in one place for you to allow you to communicate treatment guidelines or even just record or save this information to the case file for later. That sums up our treatment tab, but another tool having to do with treatment is the Tao Index. I'm going to start from scratch again and start with a new example. Let's use carpal tunnel syndrome. And then I'll jump over to the Tao Index tab. Now, Tao stands for Treatment Analyzer on Outcomes. So before I get into the Tao Index itself, I just want to go over what we're looking at on this screen. So we've entered carpal tunnel syndrome, and it's giving me all of the procedures that might be considered for carpal tunnel syndrome, sorted by frequency. So the most common is at the top. But you can sort by any of these columns, including CPT code, procedure name, procedure group or category. Of course, right now, it defaults to sorting by frequency. If you click on frequency, you can actually find even more information, like median number of visits, average number of visits, auto-authorized number of visits. You get cost information, both total and per visit. That's just going to be national averages. You can also see the payment flag and the Tao Index. Now, those are arguably the two most important columns in this tab. So right now, all the ones we can see up here are thumbs up. And that means that from a utilization review perspective, these should all be auto-approved. There is no need for review for any of these procedures. But they are two different colors. So what do the colors mean? Well, a green flag is evidence-based approval. That means that this procedure is supported by the medical evidence. If we go into the treatment guidelines, we're going to see plenty of systematic reviews and controlled trials that support the efficacy of this procedure, versus a yellow thumbs up or a yellow flag, which is what we call data-driven approval. And that is where the Tao Index comes in. The Tao Index is a score that ranges from -100 to +100. And it tells us how well each medical intervention correlates with return to work. So anything above 0 is better than average. As a note here, we know that correlation does not equal causation. But because it's associated with good outcomes, we can definitively say that it's not causing poor outcomes. So this, paired with the support of any medical evidence that we do have and any claims data, means that it's a safe procedure to auto-approve or auto-authorize. So that's the really cool thing about this Tao Index score, is that it helps us fill in the gaps where maybe scientific or medical evidence is lacking or isn't quite comprehensive enough to give us an answer. There's two other possible payment flags or approval flags. And by the way, I do encourage users to not just look at this tool as a utilization review tool, though that's what it was built for. It's actually really a great place to check before you even bother going into the treatment guidelines, because if you see that this combo, carpal tunnel syndrome and any procedure you're looking for, if you've got a thumbs up, you don't even need to look in the treatment guidelines, because this is definitely an appropriate procedure, and there should be no hesitation. If a doctor wants to order it, then there should be no cause for review or pushback. Now, so the two other possible flag colors we have are red and black. And let me just show 100 entries per page, and we can scroll down. So as we start to get into less frequently ordered, that's when we start to see different flag colors. You can see that a red flag is a picture of a guy on a headset. It just says route for review. No cause for alarm here. That doesn't mean, this is a denial flag. It just means route for review. So any red flag, it's very possible that it's an appropriate procedure, but it's just necessary to make sure. So a perfect example of a red flag would be work conditioning and work hardening, which is an expensive program. It's common in workers' comp, but it's effective only for carefully selected patients. So it's worth your time and money in doing the review. Once you see a red flag, that's when you think, okay, time to go into the treatment guidelines and look at those criteria. Make sure that John Doe is an appropriate candidate for this procedure. So that's where a red flag comes in. It doesn't mean that it's not a good idea. It just means we have to make sure before it's definitely ordered. And then the last possibility for a flag is black. And it's a picture of a hand. You can think of it as saying stop or slow down. It means route for review with extreme caution. We actually call black flags good candidates for denial. They still are not denial flags. It still means review, but we wanted to have the distinction between red and black so that you know which ones could very well be appropriate and which ones probably aren't. Now, anyone on the treatment side is probably not going to see a lot of black flags because you're not looking for them. You probably already know them without us having to tell you. But we, especially for a utilization review standpoint, we want to make sure that there is a distinction between red flags and black flags. But the reason neither red nor black, neither of those flags are denial flags is because the point of this tool is to get the right care approved as quickly as possible. This is not a denial tool, it's an approval tool. So the point of the Tao Index is to auto-approve all appropriate and safe and effective procedures. So that's why we have two different flags for auto-approval, even though they mean different things. Okay, there's just a couple other things to go over. As long as we've got carpal tunnel syndrome plugged in, let's jump over to the cost tab. I can see a check mark is lit up there, so that means content has been delivered for me there. And the cost tab is projecting costs for total claim costs up here at the top. And then it also breaks down my costs into indemnity, medical, and administrative expense. Now, right now, all we have plugged in is carpal tunnel syndrome, and I'm going to leave that way for now because I want to go over the three possible data sets within each dial. Over here on the left is the best practice. That's the lowest cost, the lowest data set. The best practice, just like in our duration tab, is going to be the goal. It will underestimate costs for most claims, but it's a great number to shoot for. The middle data set is the claim typical. It is, you guessed it, representative of a typical claim. It's actually not the statistical average because the statistical average includes outliers, which often drive that number way up. So even though it's not the true average, the claim typical, which is the average minus the outliers, the claim typical represents a typical claim very well. Whereas the claim max, which is the true statistical average, including the outliers, is actually more representative of a problematic claim. But it's a great number to use if you want to demonstrate savings against the actual historical average. Any number that you compare to that, any savings are true savings because this really is the true statistical average. But like I said, if you're, for example, setting reserves or something, this claim max is what you want to use if your case is particularly problematic. It's really going to overestimate costs for a typical claim. I have the ability to check this box for medical only to see the indemnity costs disappear. Although you'll notice even the medical costs are then reduced dramatically. That's just because the best thing you can do is keep people working in some capacity. It's not only therapeutic, but it also keeps overall costs way down. I'm going to uncheck that box for our purposes because I want to add a bunch of new claim level information to see how these projections change. So again, I'm going to refine my search. Let's say my claimant's 45. You can watch these numbers change as we add new information. State is a really important one for the cost tab. We'll say California. Again, confounding factors are important to factor in. In this case, we can add legal representation. Jumped way up. You can also enter the actual claims wage if you have it. Otherwise, it's just going to use the state average weekly wage. So it's up to you what you want included there. And then let's add maybe diabetes. And, you know, job title, that's going to affect things. I also want to mention, I should have said it in the duration tab, if you enter your date of injury here, it's going to auto-calculate your target return to work date for you, or you can choose to enter it yourself based on the duration tab. But I think that sums up, oh, no, it doesn't. I completely skipped the formulary. Sorry, guys. There's so much information to go over. Luckily, the formulary is really quick, so just want to show you that. I'll just jump over to the formulary tab. And this is where we get our medication guidance. So where we index all the medications found in the treatment guidelines, and we have them categorized by drug class, generic name, and brand name. And you can sort by any of these categories. All drugs are one of two colors. This status column answers the question, is this drug approved as a first-line treatment in ODG? Green is yes. Red is no. Although keep in mind that any red drug or no drug may be approved as a second-line treatment, just not first-line. We also include cost information, and keep in mind that this cost column represents a typical course of therapy. So it's not per pill or per week, it's a typical course of therapy for that drug. And this is an extension of the treatment guidelines, which means I can click on any record and it will open the treatment guidelines where that record is addressed. So I can see why it's recommended or not recommended for certain diagnoses or body systems. And I also get a list of any NDCs that apply to that drug with links into Medline Plus, so I can get that consumer-facing information on the medication. And lastly, in this tab, we also have the opioid MED calculator, which is where we can enter any daily dosage to calculate the morphine equivalent, and colored flags are triggered as opioid dosage approaches, reaches, and exceeds ODG parameters. You can see how that flag changes, and you can scroll down to get a breakdown of the opioid dosing risk levels, and also keep in mind if there's any drug that isn't present on this list, you can enter one here. And of course, you don't have to put all of your milligrams under the same drug. You can spread it out for your daily dosage to add up over multiple drugs. Okay, and that really does sum it up. I don't know if we have time for questions, Daph. Looks like about 5 minutes, but did any questions come in?
Yeah, we are getting a lot of questions, so it looks like we will probably just get back to most people through email following the webinar, because there's no way we're going to cover them all. But Carrie, that was so excellent. I'm going to just get to a couple things here. Is there further training available to my staff?
Yes, definitely. So live personalized training and Q&A is available from your account manager. I'm an account manager. That's what we do. That's what we're here for. So if you know who that is, you should reach out to them. If you don't, you should ask the help desk, or just respond to the webinar email, and we can put you in touch with the right person. But also there's an online self-paced training tool at the top of the screen under the help and training links. You have a lot of different options for training, so check those out, as well as the ODG help desk email, which is there.
Okay, great. Thanks, Carrie. And also I want to remind everyone that if you go to our marketing website, mcg.com/ODG, we have a client resources section that also has a lot of great training tools there. And Carrie, if you can you kick it back to my screen and I'll put up our final slide?
Did it work?
I think so. Anyway, I'm going to wrap up the webinar now since there's no way we can get to everybody's question, and we'll just follow up with you through email. So thank you so much for attending. Please get in touch with us at odghelp@mcg.com or 1-800-488-5548 if you have more questions. And again, we will get back to your questions individually. Thank you so much, Carrie. That was excellent. And thank you, everyone, for putting up with our first time using this new webinar platform. And Carrie, you did a great job. So thank you.
Thanks, Daphne, and thanks, everyone. Bye.
All right, goodbye.